The nomination of Amy Coney Barrett was the third ultra-conservative justice Trump was able to appoint to the Supreme Court in just 4 years. He was also able to appoint a record number of lifetime federal judges across the country. Now, millions of progressives are worried about what this new Supreme Court dynamic could mean in terms of maintaining their constitutionally protected rights and preserving any new potential gains. To join me to discuss more is constitutional lawyer Mara Verheyden-Hilliard of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. Mara, thank you so much for joining me. So Trump has recently called for the Supreme Court to intervene in the presidential election. Of course, we all remember the famous Bush v. Gore case in 2000, where the Supreme Court essentially handpicked President George W. Bush over, around 500 what they deemed illegitimate votes. Pretty stark example of what I would call a right-wing coup. Now, Trump, of course, ramming through these three ultra-conservative justices in his short term thus far. Do you think that the Supreme Court would have any standing here to intervene, as Trump is claiming?
Well, I guess there's two questions. There's the political standing and there's the legal standing. Obviously, Trump is hoping that he can work up a case sufficient to get to the Supreme Court and have the Supreme Court, which is now packed with his appointees, determine that some number of ballots, particularly the mail-in ballots that were being counted on election day or thereafter, that he feels changed the outcome for him, are somehow not legitimate ballots. That's his goal, that's his focus, and he's obviously hoping that there is some wisp of a legal basis to have those ballots thrown out. And there are finally multiple lawsuits in many states, it sounds like, and they're trying to find some angle. So the angle is that, they try and get affidavits from people to say that they think that the counting was done improperly, or that they weren't allowed to get their observers in close enough to observe, although over and over again, everyone is describing the number of observers and cameras and the number of, people's hands that a ballot has to go through in order to be certified, such that no one person is just making the decision. But they're desperately trying to find something, or they want to say that ballots aren't postmarked properly, or that the state laws or the decisions that are allowing ballots to be received after a certain period of time or after Election Day are somehow not legitimate, even though it's Trump and the Trump administration that did everything they could to derail the American Postal Service to try and delay ballots from being received. So there's many different avenues they're throwing up a lot of garbage and hoping that something sticks, and that it will stick enough that it will get past one court and another court, and that maybe they can find their way to the Supreme Court, which again is packed with Trump appointees. The court has already, in several circumstances, directed that ballots received after Election Day or after a point in time in Election Day be segregated. So they left that door open, that somehow there is a distinction between ballots received on Election Day by a certain time and ballots that were received afterwards. But there's also the political reality right now. And I think the Supreme Court would really have to consider whether or not, if they were to intervene, if they were to throw this election back, if they were to invalidate hundreds of thousands of people's actual votes and legitimate votes, what that would do to the legitimacy of the court in people's views. And I think we all know that were that to happen, a significant portion of American society would really see the court as fully illegitimate and nothing more than a pure political tool.
Right. What is your legal opinion on this allegation of widespread voter fraud and election fraud? You mentioned that there was a deliberate sabotage at the post office, and we also know that the GOP, as well as Trump administration, were engaged in litigation to actually stop states like Pennsylvania from counting mail-in ballots before Election Day.
There is no evidence that anyone has presented to the public of voter fraud. No widespread irregularities, nothing that could even overcome the numbers of votes that have been counted. And really, what's happening is a modern day form of racist voter suppression. In the old days, you had, like the old Supreme Court Justice who's no longer alive, with Rehnquist, who himself acted as a voter suppressor back before he took the court. This is just the same old politics of the right wing trying to stop people from voting and then trying to stop having those votes count.
What do you think the outcome will be of these three ultra-conservative Supreme Court justices that Trump has picked, as well as the lifetime appointment of so many federal judges in lower courts? What does that mean for the country, Mara?
It's going to be very damaging for civil rights and civil liberties. There is no question about it. The cases that are coming up, cases that are going through district courts and in courts of appeal, these federal courts, and ultimately up to the Supreme Court, are now going to be decided by judges who have a particular political point of view, and the clerks that they bring in who see everything through their own lens. And that is not friendly or hospitable to civil rights, to human rights, to civil liberties in many instances. That's a reality. But there's also the reality, again, like on the Supreme Court, you could see with Justice Roberts changing his position or an expected position in a number of instances, that the courts always have to balance out a political agenda with delegitimizing themselves. And if the courts begin to look over and over and over again like nothing more than unlegal rubber stamps for a political agenda, they're going to lose any sense of legitimacy with the American public. And that's a very dangerous path to go on. But again, just to remind everyone that the idea that everything that happens that's progressive in American society happens in the courts in sort of a isolated or neutral universe is a fantasy. The courts both act in terms of the political reality of the justices that are appointed, even though everyone likes to pretend that's not true. Everybody knows it's true. And then at the same time, there is a complete response to what is happening outside and on the streets. Just as the legislative response is always a response to what's actually happening outside on the streets. And so that's how you can have the Supreme Court, shift so dramatically decade after decade and centuries in taking positions that then it later fully shifts on because society has changed and the court is forced to change with society.
Right. A lot of groundbreaking legislation in the past was upheld by the Supreme Court because of the people's movement, this militant organizing that was taking place in the streets, and they kind of feared making any other decision, I'm sure.
Even when you think about the rulings from the 80s forward when it comes to the rights of LGBT people, this is, all you have to do is look at they were ruling in the 80s in Bowers v. Hardwick, supporting as constitutional laws that said that people couldn't engage in sex, that two men could not have sexual relations. And then, 17 years later, they just overturned that. And then some years after that, suddenly then you have marriage equality. Now, if all these things were enshrined in the Constitution, and so obviously enshrined as constitutional or unconstitutional, they couldn't change. Just as you wouldn't be able to go from, Dred Scott and Plessy v. Ferguson, saying that Black people do not possess rights as American citizens, and that being separate but equal is acceptable, to suddenly, not suddenly, but over a period of struggle, then Brown v. Board of Education. So over and over again, the court ultimately has to follow along with where society is at.
What do you think about the progressive demand to pack the courts? Do you think that that is a long-term solution for what we've seen happen?
I think it's dangerous because anyone can pack the courts. So if the progressives want to pack the courts, what's to stop, the right wing from packing the courts? The issue really is looking at the infirmity of how the court is constructed, how the court rules, who are the people that sit on the court. And this has been debated for quite some time in American society, and I think even more in the recent period, where people really begin to question, who are these people that make the decision? How can it be that one person dies and tens of millions of women's health care is now potentially being fully erased? This is a real question that people are asking themselves, and correctly asking themselves, in terms of how the court operates, how it's structured, and even this idea of lifetime appointments, that somebody can be on the court and just stay there for so very long. Even if society evolves around one person, they can just hang on. These are all issues that I think are in fair play in terms of how the court operates and how it's structured.
You mentioned who these people are and how a lot of us don't even really know who the justices are that are controlling so much and are the ultimate deciders on crucial rights issues of our time, Mara. A lot of these justices that are on these lists for Trump to have nominated, not just with the Supreme Court, but all of these different circuit courts across the country, come from the Federalist Society. Briefly talk about what this organization is and what ideology the justices that arise out of this organization have.
The Federalist Society was created in the very early 80s, really in the wake of the Reagan election. And it was a response, as were so many other of these right-wing initiatives and the Reagan era itself, to the incredible successes and incredible impacts of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the anti-war movement. So as the progressive movement had come forward, and people always fight towards justice and towards human liberation. That is the organic nature of humanity. And then there are always the forces of reaction. So this was a very effective and very smart initiative that was undertaken and took years to really gain strength, to gain steam. But what they did is by organizing on campuses in particular, they began to build up a body of ideologues, a body of lawyers, law students, judges who began to seed the courts, seed legal institutions and government institutions, and bring that ideology with them. And it became very strong, it's become very powerful. And the progressive movement did nothing similar. They really didn't build that structure where they were training people, where they were organizing people, but the Federalist Society did. And you can see the outcome. I mean, someone like Justice Kavanaugh had been groomed his whole life for the position that he now holds. And that's really an impact of the Federalist Society.
You've mentioned to me that people have a misconception about the Bill of Rights, where they think it enshrines the rights of people. You say that that's not exactly accurate.
The Bill of Rights, in my view, is a document not posing a grant of rights to the people, but really is a bill of restrictions on government conduct. You think about the First Amendment, Congress shall make no laws. I mean, right there, it's not telling people that we're granting you the freedom of speech, it's telling the government that it cannot create laws that restrict these existing rights, the freedom of speech or the freedom of religion and the rights to assembly, the rights to association. These are all fundamental rights that we already hold. And similarly, throughout the document, throughout the Bill of Rights, you can see over and over again, it's saying to the police that you can't conduct searches in a particular way, that people have a Fourth Amendment right when it comes to search and seizure. Throughout the document, over and over again, it is a restriction on what the government may do in terms of infringement and attacks on the rights that we already have. And that's really important for people to understand that the rights are theirs, that we have rights. These are fundamental human rights. These are basic rights. And that the government is restricted in how it may govern when it comes to an effort to suppress the basic rights of the people that every society must have.
And you just helped start a new initiative called the Center for Protest Law and Litigations. Mara, explain what this is and why it's necessary now more than ever.
At the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, we have just launched the new program, which is the Center for Protest Law and Litigation. We're really excited about this initiative. It's building on 25 years of work that we have done, where we have litigated cases across the country against both police agencies and federal agencies, fighting for the rights of people to be able to speak out, to be able to assemble, to engage in collective action, fighting for access to public space, defending people who are being politically targeted because of their First Amendment activity. And we feel that the time is now to really expand and resource that work in a coordinated, effective national way. We need to be able to have a coordinated fight back. Across the United States, there is an extraordinary effort from state to state to enact anti-protest laws. There are targeted prosecutions of political activists, an effort to shut down a growing racial justice movement that has had such a powerful impact. From the summer, you could see the response from the police, from the federal law enforcement. And we know that as we move forward, even under a Democratic administration, which of course people feel, a sense of relief that the Trump administration is basically unelected, that it will be gone. But we also know that these rights, that our ability to speak out is crucial, and that we can't be comforted in believing that these rights are not going to be under assault. They are. And as more and more people are demanding racial justice, demanding climate justice, fighting against climate catastrophe, everything that happens because of a people's movement. All progressive change comes from that people's movement. Our goal is to protect that space and to make sure that people have the space to fight for what they believe in.